There we go. We are recording. Welcome all for this, our third training this year from TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. My name is Davey Gerhard, and I am the Canon for Stewardship in the Diocese of California, and I am the Executive Director of TENS. It is a privilege to lead TENS as we move more into the realm of online education and training. And many of you, I see, are faithful resubscribers to our webinars. So you've been here before, and some of you are brand new. So thank you and welcome. As a reminder, I just wanted to let you know we are recording. You got that little message. We want to honor your privacy where you are. And so if you don't want your face to be on something that's going to be published on a website, go ahead and click off your camera. We want to honor your personal privacy and rights to it. But if you want to show your face, we're happy to see it as well. So with that, I'm going to dig into our content. Today, we have a few learning objectives. We're going to talk about what does a stewardship committee do? In that, we're going to talk about when it should get started and the kinds of people that you might want to invite. We're going to talk about jobs on the committee members. And one of the things I'll be sending at the end of this is a list of job descriptions, not a list of, but actual job descriptions that we have built out and gathered from around the church on what members do. And so we'll be sharing those examples with you. It's really helpful when you have volunteers to have a job description so that everybody knows what's expected of them. We're going to be talking a lot about theological formation, things that the committee can do to create its own formation and support, and also ways that you can share that formation with your congregation and lead people into those deep formation exercises around generosity and stewardship. And finally, we're going to talk about how to set goals for pledge campaigns. And when I do that, I'm going to tell you why I think the Stewardship Committee should be a part of goal setting when it comes time to our congregation budgets. So that's a little teaser for that section of the presentation. Let's start off by talking about the role of the stewardship team. And I'm going to jump right out with the first controversial statement of the morning, that the stewardship team is not the fundraising committee. Yes, our work will result, hopefully, in money being raised for the church budget, and we will do that work. And many congregations run stewardship campaigns or pledge drives or generosity and blessing promise campaigns, all kinds of things. I've heard all the names, and they're all great. But while the result in that is often money raised or commitments made to the pledge, stewardship is a greater concept of how we engage the creation, how we engage the abundance that we've been shown by God, how we engage generosity with each other. And so the stewardship team isn't just about the bottom line. The stewardship team is holding that spiritual practice of generosity and abundance. We'll be talking about that as we move through today. So yes, we hope money will be raised, but we hope that it'll be raised because people will have a deeper understanding of the relationship between gratitude and generosity. And if I could say the one thing that a stewardship committee should do best, it's teach that practice to our congregations, that there's a relationship between gratitude and generosity, and that we want to give that to our members. So certainly a pledge drive campaign is your practical team, and they are charged with communicating this year's theme. So we'll get you started early in the year talking about what the theme is. Maybe you use TENS or another model that has a theme attached to it, or maybe you go through a creative exercise where you create your own tagline or your theme around which you will hang your stewardship campaign. Whatever you do, it's your first role as a member of your team to learn how to communicate that, learn what that means. If it's a mission statement or a tagline or a value statement, create that and work on that in your group. And then you'll build the materials that go along with it. Later this summer, we have an entire webinar devoted just to how to create great case-making materials. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time today talking about how to make the case. We have a whole webinar for that. And so sign up for that one. You'll get a whole 90 minutes just on that topic. But you'll want to create messaging and create a brochure or a pamphlet or a pledge card or update your website. You're going to want to do those things that match your theme for the year. You want to work with your treasurer, your finance committee, your leadership, your vestry to align messaging. Everybody should know what the theme of your stewardship campaign is for the year. Everybody should be on the same page. And if we keep saying that language, using those talking points at all levels of our church structure, then our members will get the message too. So I'll take a moment to align with everyone. If you have a communications team, some group of folks who update your website or create a parish newsletter or things like that, work with them early on. What are some creative ways that we might get the word out this year, or talk about what our theme is and how we might want to do that? We want to plan to roll out the campaign. Kurt, I see your hand up and I'll get to you in just a second. So we want to be able to have the team create a timeline. Now we have a timeline at TENS that we use for our materials, and it starts now with recruiting your team and it goes throughout the year. But whatever your model is, create a timeline for when you want things to happen, little milestones, so that everybody is on the same page. This is really helpful throughout the summer when people start going on vacation. In August, when everybody comes back and says, oh my gosh, it's almost time for our campaign, what needs to get done? If we create a timeline, then there are some dates that people all agree to up front. What is our structure? Are we going to do house conversations? Are we going to do letters? Are we going to do phone calls? Are we going to do in-person visits? How are we going to run our campaign? What model do we want? And then plan already right at the beginning. How are we going to acknowledge our members and their gifts? How are we going to follow up? How does that factor into our timeline? If we need to have our campaign done by here so that the treasurer and finance committee can create the budget on this date, how much time do we need in between there to follow up with people who haven't yet had a chance to turn in their pledge information or secure those year-end donations or things that people like to do when we're working at the end of a campaign? So plan for it early. And finally, plan for the kickoff and the ingathering, those two moments of beginning and ending a campaign. Maybe create a subcommittee of your stewardship committee or a group of folks who love planning parties to do that work, and separate it from the rest of the work of your campaign. I say that only because if everybody does the fun job of planning the party, which everyone wants to do, then the other things that happen in the campaign start to fall behind. So make sure if you're going to do any kind of parties that you have a party committee, that you have some groups who are just dedicated to that, and that the other folks on the stewardship campaign team can be doing all the other stuff. Kurt, your hand is up, so come on off mute.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, David. My question, I guess, is to get you to react to something that we're going to try that directly relates to the last two slides. We're trying to stand up a year-round stewardship group committee this year, something we've talked about, haven't done. And the reason is because we feel like when we were running the annual pledge campaign, it was getting very tactical, very transactional, and we were not in that time frame able to do the stewardship education that you were speaking about on the previous slide.
Yep.
So we are actually separating those two.
Okay.
So there'll be some connective tissue between them. They'll have some of the same players, so that what stewardship is trying to do theologically with that foundation will be reflected. We're not going to have,
Mhm.
we're not trying to get people to think about abundance and generosity and then have an annual giving campaign that's all about responsibility and obligation,
Right.
right? So we got to be connected.
Yeah.
But we're going to try to separate them. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments or thoughts on that, if anyone else has had any
Great.
thoughts or experience on intentionally trying to separate them so that we can
Yeah.
address that.
Well, Kurt, first of all, yay. Um, Year-round stewardship committees is something I'm advocating, and I hope that as you go through this training today, you're getting that message that we shouldn't just grab a committee together in August and say, go for it. But that all year round, we should be talking about it. Now, that doesn't mean all year round, we're in solicitation phase and talking about making your gift, but it means that all year round, we are finding ways to insert that reminder of gratitude, abundance, and generosity into the life of our church, into the church year. So I absolutely applaud you for doing that work year round. It is the right way to go. We shouldn't be surprised every fall by stewardship. We should remember that it is a part of it. And you also hinted at the reason why, because when we don't talk about money all year long, and all of a sudden we have this intense period where we talk about money, it feels transactional. It feels goal-oriented with narrow blinders. And we don't want that to happen. We want people to feel that this is an integrated part of being a part of the community, that that's what we do. As to get to your specific question about separating them out, I'm more comfortable when you say that there's that connective tissue, because there should be dialogue between people doing formation and people running the campaign. Because if there's a disconnect, then as you say, it feels broken in some way. That said, not everybody has all of the gifts to do all of the things. So I might, and we're gonna talk about this a little later when we talk about who should serve on a stewardship committee and how to identify their gifts. But you might call the whole thing the stewardship committee. You might have one group that's about formation, and one group that's about campaign logistics, and one group that's about party planning. And I'm not suggesting that you have a campaign of 20 people. That would probably be ridiculous in most churches, but that you have a few people, a couple people on each of those different tasks that can carry that work and pull in other people as they need to, if they need numbers in that thought partner or the enrollment of that activity. So I wouldn't completely separate them out. I would call them one committee with tasks and see if that keeps them unified, so that the folks who are worried about logistics aren't taking away time for the people who are concerned and trying to create formation programs. So let's, I love it though. I love that you're thinking about this. I love that you have tasks within your campaign and focus areas, I should say, better than tasks. So great. I love it. Thank you. What a good witness. We'll get more on that, a little more granular on that as we move through. When it comes to inviting people to serve on your committee, like recruiting for your vestry, take the time to really meet with someone and see if this is something that they feel called to do. A personal ask, a personal request is so much more effective because you can gauge somebody's temperature on it. If you send them an email and you say, we really need people to join the stewardship committee, will you do it? And maybe you tell them a little bit about the time commitment or whatever the task at hand or the goal. They might say yes, but they might not really understand it all, or they might not have time to ask all the questions. They might feel, you might get an answer of yes, I'll serve, and really that's the person who didn't really think it through yet, or no, I don't have time for that, because they haven't understood all the ways that they can participate, and maybe it's not as big a deal as or big a time commitment or whatever. So why do I say, that's why I say, let's do that in a personal conversation. Recruit people to this committee as you would your vestry. These are serious people accomplishing a serious task, working for a really important purpose in the church. If they tell you right off, I hate talking about money, say thank you. There are other ministries for which you would be better suited in our congregation. I will put you on the list of don't ask to serve on stewardship, or maybe you can come to some formation exercises throughout the year and learn why stewardship isn't just about money, it's about other things. But if somebody comes right up front and says, I hate that idea, give them that space to participate in some other committee of your church. The more seriously you treat the recruitment process, the more you'll communicate to everyone, the members and the church, how important this committee is and how important the work of this group is to the functioning of our community. I get asked often, how big should my stewardship team be? And many of us, especially those of us who are in pastoral or family-sized congregations, might not have a whole bunch of people to rely on to recruit into a team. But a couple of ideas that you want to take in mind. The first is, what's your structure for your campaign? So if you are doing a campaign that's going to be person-to-person asks, you're going to need a lot of people to handle that, because getting through a list of 100 people and all the phone calls or appointments you'll need to set up to do that will require enough people that they have time to do that work, right? So look at your structure first. If your structure is personal notes and letter writing or phone calls, or if it's just all done on Sundays in church, where you do minutes for mission and you send out letters and you talk about it from another standpoint, then you might not need as large a committee. So first, look at your structure. Then really take a look at how much work needs to be done and how many hours does that take. That takes a little thought, right? So if we want to plan a big party and we want to do personal asks and personal thank you notes, we probably need a lot of people to serve on this. If we don't have a lot of people, what of those things do we pare back or do differently or whatever? Because at the end of the day, we are busy people in our churches, in our families, and our work lives. And we can't ask people to spend 20 hours a week on this during the fall or whenever your stewardship campaign is. People just don't have that much time. So think about that when it comes to your committee size. I like, I like a group between 6 and 10. If you have that many people, I think it's a nice number because you can get people together more easily than a group of 25, where 5 people will always be traveling and some people will be sick and you'll never get everyone together at once. Have a smaller, reliable number, but it's all comes back to your structure. So according to the recently retired Bishop Dan Edwards of Nevada, your stewardship committee should be in place by Easter. So we are right on track doing this in Lent as we are. He reminds us that an effective team, a team that comes together and does its work, will raise more money to fund the church's mission. They will be prepared. They will have their plan in place. They will know what they're doing. It will result in great gifts. They will also engender support and appreciation for all the other parish ministries. This is to say that stewardship committee members are ambassadors, evangelists. They will talk about mission, not just about budget and money and funding. We want our stewardship committee members to be talking about our kids program, our volunteer, our outreach, the way we do pastoral care, the way we communicate with our community and and serve our neighbors, your stewardship committee engenders the support and appreciation, highlights all those opportunities for mission that we have in our churches. The project is also a chance for members of the team to form and deepen relationships amongst themselves. One of the things that happens when we have a stewardship committee that meets around the year and continues from year to year, maybe a couple people drop off and a couple people are added, but there's always kind of a core group that shifts, stays with it from year to year. Then we get a community within a community, a group of people who are doing really hard work. I want to acknowledge that fundraising in church is work, and it's joy filled, but it's also a lot of effort. And so we need a committee of folks. We need support in that, so that stewardship committee can really create its own community of support and deep relationships. Finally, they spread a spirituality of grateful generosity throughout the whole congregation. Everyone is enriched when the formation activities, as Kurt said, if you're getting your congregation theologically formed around generosity and abundance, everybody's spirit will be lifted by that, and their understanding of their role in creating the mission of our church and enacting it will be enhanced. So your stewardship team is a really important group of people, and they're not just transactional, and they're not just your sales team. They are a group of people who are really helping advocate for the mission of our church. When it comes time to looking at who is best to serve on a committee, I like to look at a few different criteria. First, people who know people. You would like to recruit people on your stewardship team who really are well connected in the congregation. Those people who, people always are showing up at dinner to their house. They run the best potluck. They are the people who are always have a group around them at coffee hour. This isn't a cult of personality, but it's people who attract other people. Look for those loud laughs and those big smiles and those people who really show that people connect to them. Those are people that you might want to consider to be on your stewardship team. Also, people who are a representation of your congregation. So diversify your stewardship team as much as you can. It's not just the folks who first raise their hand. You might need to go a little deeper and say, we really need some people who have young families to serve on the stewardship team. We really need some folks who serve in some of our outreach ministries to serve on the stewardship team. Look at your programs and look at the composition of your congregation and say, we'd like some representation on it. If you have multiple services, invite people from multiple services to be on the stewardship team, so that when they show up in a service and talk about stewardship, they're not, that 11 o'clock person who's going to the 9 o'clock folks. Talk through it and make sure that you have folks who are representative of the various services that you have, and those include weekday services or other things. If you have a faithful group at those, ask someone from one of those services to serve on your team as well. This brings cohesion. Often when our churches get big enough to have multiple services, there's a little sense of loss because you don't see everyone in the sanctuary every Sunday. You see them, only in passing between coffee hours or whatever. So make sure that you do that in your stewardship team. Recruit people who love the congregation. Those people who are always ready to say, I love this place because it saved my life, or it gave my family a home when we needed it, or because it's taught me so much about Jesus, or because I just love what happens here. Those people whose passion for your congregation spreads it to others. I used to say infectious, but that's not something we say post-pandemic anymore. So let's talk about people who really love your congregation. And you know who those people are. So invite at least one of those to be on your team. They will be the evangelists, the ambassadors. They will be those people who are so shameless, they will go and talk about your church to strangers or break into a conversation at coffee hour with people that they might not know as well and be ready to talk about what happens at church. These are great people to have on your stewardship team. People who have a heart for stewardship, invite them. So let's begin by reminding ourselves that not everybody is born to raise money or is comfortable talking about it. So separate those people out and give them other wonderful jobs to do in your church. So find people who are so passionate about the mission that they can maybe get over some of their own shyness about talking about money and ask for people to share their gifts. Recruit those people who just love what you're doing and will be able to talk about it eloquently and easily with people. Again, this reminds us, as we said before, that stewardship is about more than the pledge campaign. Everything that we're doing to engender and remind people that we are generous people formed by an abundant God that is created in a close community of love. Those are the things that that stewardship is about. All those gifts that we receive, we share with the world. Our time, our talent, our treasure. I'm trying to get away from 3 T's and start to introduce the 3 W's: wealth, works, and wisdom. Those gifts and ways that we share with the world, all those things that we have been given and want to share with our community. So those are some big categories. Let's talk about rounding out the team with other folks you might want to be on the hunt for at coffee hour or in volunteer outreach or in church. People with good skills. We all know who in our community can get things done. They run a great meeting, they have an agenda, their meetings end on time, they are accountable, reliable. When you need something done, you call this person in your church. If they're available and interested to serve on your stewardship team, they are a great person to recruit. So people with some good skills. People with credibility. Every congregation has people who may not be on the vestry, may have served other years on the vestry, but maybe not this year. They're not identified as leaders in any particular way, but they are leaders because of their respectability, because they've been there, or because people trust them, because they have that respect. They might be people who have been in your congregation for a long time, or people who have come in and really shown what they have, and that the people are ready to follow them. You as congregational leaders can identify who those other leaders are. And even if they don't have the title to back it up, ask one of them. The stewardship committee is a great place to develop some lay leadership skills or to hone them so that they can go on to be great vestry members or great deanery or delegates to convention or whatever. This is a place where we really form people to do the ministry and wider mission of the church. So ask those people who have that inherent credibility in your congregation. People with time. So that person who is always frazzled and shows up, can't always make every meeting because they don't have the time to do it. You ask them to serve on the stewardship committee and they say, that's great, but I'm going to be traveling all of October. There are other things for them to do. We want people who have the time to do it. Or if in Kurt's case, if you're doing this year round, so don't put that person who's traveling in October in the campaign logistics team, put them in the year-round formation part or some other task. So really know how to sense beyond enthusiasm who has time for it. Don't choose anyone who is a part of your existing senior leadership. So your warden shouldn't be on your stewardship team. Your treasurer definitely shouldn't be on your stewardship team. If they're already serving on the finance committee, they shouldn't be on your stewardship team. They can have liaison roles. You can be in communication with them, but they shouldn't do it because they have other things that are really important to do in the church, and we don't want to take away their time from those tasks either. Stewardship isn't an afterthought. It's its own ministry and it's its own mission. So do it with people who have time. That said, I will say that some of the people I know and rely on in church are the people who are the busiest, the people who have an active professional life, who volunteer, who are raising families, and you look at them and you wonder, how are there enough hours in your day to do all the things that you do? And they also make some of the best volunteers for stewardship because they have really good time management skills. So just because they appear busy, if they still have those skills of knowing how to get things done and managing their time, they could be right. But that person who just doesn't have time, let them do something else in the church. I think probably the most basic rule in fund development at any level is that people also need to be able to make their own commitment. When you make your own gift to the stewardship campaign, your own gift of treasure and time and talent, you can then authentically ask others to make their gifts. I always ask that my vestry and my stewardship team and my clergy in a congregation be the first ones to give. In fact, they should make those gifts even before the campaign starts, so that we can start and say, we already have 100% of the leadership on board. They've made their gifts. We're really excited. We are already going into the campaign with a strong tailwind behind us. We're doing well. So it makes it feel a little less daunting. So really push for that. Your committee members should make their first gifts. Your clergy, your vestry, they should be giving. If you have folks who don't pledge, there are other things for them to do besides serve on the stewardship team. It is inauthentic to ask people to make their gifts if people can't make their own gifts. Now, I'm not talking about people who can't because they just don't have money. If they're giving in other ways, they're rolling up their sleeves every Saturday and they're saying, you know, I only have a couple of dollars to put in the plate and I really want to help tell my story on the stewardship committee. They are a great person because they fill those other tasks of evangelist or great volunteers, but they have to be able to demonstrate that they are giving of themselves to the church in some way. That's important because it's about our own authentic piece of our story. If you were in the last year's webinar that we did on campaign practices and pep talks, you've seen these slides before, but I want to remind them again because as stewardship committee members, we do have a role to play in the asking of people to share their gifts. And I want to go over a couple of strategies, those pastoral moments that we get into on a stewardship committee. And I want to start by reminding us that when we talk about money and faith, it is a pastoral topic. It's not just about the budget or the mission or the work. It is about those things. But we're also talking about people's deep stuff and their pastoral relationships. Many of us use our gift giving to express other thoughts in church, whether that's a good or a bad practice. We can take that as it is, but some people will stop giving if they're unhappy with leadership. And we don't know why they've stopped giving, but they have, and they haven't been able to communicate that they're upset. So it's a good thing to pay attention to when we notice somebody's pulling back their giving and be able to have not just a, why aren't you giving conversation, but a, what's going on conversation. As committee members, you'll know, and your clergy can help you create those boundaries for when it's appropriate for you to engage in pastoral conversations and when it's appropriate for you to say, I think that's something you should talk with our priest about, or our deacon, or your pastoral care team, or whatever. So know those places, and we can go over some examples later if we need to. Well, let's talk about some of those questions that we are asked or that we feel when we go into some challenging times, and we are in challenging times and have been for a while. So first, when it comes time to that campaign, there's no shame in a household pledging less this year than they did in other years. If people need to make a change in their giving, we want them to right size according to their budget. Give till it hurts is never a message we want in our stewardship campaigns. We want people to give where it's joyful and where it's healthy and where it's sustainable. Remember that not everybody is struggling the same way. I say this throughout the pandemic. I've been saying this throughout inflation. Different households react differently because their money is coming in different places or their expenses come in different ways. If your household is struggling, you can't necessarily imagine that your neighbor or your other members are struggling in the same way. So don't apply your stuff to their stuff. That's all to say that there might be people that we wouldn't ask to increase because, oh my gosh, interest rates, oh my goodness, we're all like paying so much at the grocery store right now. But in fact, maybe because of their own situations, they can increase. So don't hold back. Ask for what you think is appropriate, or ask people to make the gifts that are best for them. Check in when pastoral conversations arise. Before I go to members of my own congregation, excuse me, before I go to members of my own congregation to ask them to make their gift, and in my church, we don't ask for a specific amount. We just say, I'm representing stewardship. Here's everything that we're doing. Will you make a gift this year? And then what they do on that gift is between them and the treasurer. But so I don't see that number, but other communities do it in different ways. I respect that. However you do it, if what you're getting back is some pastoral energy, some concern, or at the beginning, I might say, I'm going to contact these 10 people. I'll ask my priest, is there anyone I shouldn't contact on this list? Is there anything you know? They don't have to tell you what it is, but they might say, you might hold off talking to Davy and Simon this year. There's something that they'll share when they need to about what's going on in their lives or whatever. So it's a good way to not offend our members if we check in with our clergy who often know things that we don't know. Conversely, if we find something out in one of these conversations, they're really angry at our priest. We might not have to directly say they're angry at you, but we can say there's some conflict in this house and you might want to check in with them. We might pass that along to the clergy so that there isn't a breakdown in that communication. Again, know your boundaries, know what's safe, but remember that we do have a relationship with our members, and money is often a place where these other stories come through. If your congregation is looking at making some cuts, you just know that this year things are down, your reserves are in a place that you're worried about, and you might be facing budget cuts, yet you're going into your stewardship campaign. How do you talk about that? Everybody knows, oh, we might have to cut some hours out of the youth director, or maybe we can't do that ministry that we've loved so much in the same way. And people might have feelings about that because these are people's lives, these are programs that matter. So how do you raise money when you're also looking at cuts? So one way to do that is to remind ourselves that we are focused on the mission And the mission has to happen regardless of how much we can give to it, right? So our people still need to be fed, students still need to be tutored, families still need to be raised, seniors still need to be visited, people still need healing. All of these things still need to happen regardless of whether we have money or not. It's our role as church to make these things happen. So focus on the mission. Also, our communities might be more fragile if an industry closed, or if there's great, if a mortgage crisis happens again and people are out of work or out of home. So, big things that happen in our macro economy can impact our micro worlds as well. So look at that and see what's going on, and know that we have to focus on the mission of the church. If your church has done other things, obviously we've all claimed on our 2021 parochial reports already, and our 2022 reports that have just been submitted, we've already accounted for those PPP loans and the forgiveness for them. But mention it again, during the pandemic and our darkest moments, we did a lot to keep things running. We did a lot to stay afloat. We've done our due diligence. We're not just going to our members and saying we're in a pinch, give more. We've actually also been, as leaders, trying to shake the coins out of the cushions and say, where can we best get resources to fund our ministry? That includes applying to grants. The Episcopal Church has lots of grants available. Not everyone applies or fits them, but do some work every once in a while. And don't forget your local community foundations and your local corporate stores, chain stores like Big Box, Home Depot, or Costco, or things like that, will often give community grants of $1,500 or $2,500 or something to religious organizations and schools, because they want to do that work in the community. So go to those, and a few $1,500 gifts can make or break a small budget and a small mission or a small ministry. So do those things, and then remind people in your congregation that we're going out there and asking for these gifts. Finally, let's remember that every congregation probably has one person that we've been holding off on asking to make that big gift because we're waiting for the capital campaign, or we know we have to replace the roof or the furnace or something like that, but we haven't asked them. But maybe now is the time. Maybe now is the time to take them off I'm going to hold off asking them to write that big check. Maybe now is the time for that big check. So that's one of those things that as leaders of a congregation, we need to know how to ask for those major gifts, those single purpose gifts that sometimes we need in a crisis moment. Finally, how do we talk about uncertainty? And Christianity has a long history of uncertainty. We were formed out of uncertainty, and we created very old processes for how to create community that was resilient and adaptive through uncertainty. Remember that. It's a part of our 2,000-year history. It's a part of our theology, and the through line goes right through to how we form community, how we do Eucharist, how we create pastoral care programs in our church. That's very ancient teaching that comes through because we've often been in uncertain times together. So remember that we can do that. Also remember that when you fill out a pledge form or submit it electronically, you can and we should encourage our members, if their circumstances change, remind them that they didn't sign this in blood. We're not going to send anyone over to collect them. They can change their pledge. All they need to do is say, I can't do what I said, or I'd like to do it in this way, or I've got to hold off for a few months making my pledge and then I'll make it up later. whatever people want to say and do so that their household budget isn't strained. We should not be creating unsustainable situations for our members by their giving. So let people know, you can always take a look at this. We're open all the time. It's a conversation and no one will judge you. It is not a shameful thing to say I need to make a change. What's shameful or hurtful is when we don't say anything and we just drop out because we're worried about that. And that's the last thing we want. We don't want our members to leave because they feel like they can't fulfill a promise they made about gifts. No, we have other ways to help them with that. So that's a little bit about uncertainty, but now let's go into some of those formation practices. And I want to talk about these as something that you can start off in your own committee, and then you can radiate out into the wider church. And these are great places for you to start creating some formation tools. We have tens, and I've given you the link and I'll send it out in the materials after this session. We have what we call a money autobiography, and it goes through a list of questions, some of them more invasive than others, so you can take a look at it and see what works for your congregation. But it's a way to very deeply and vulnerably take a look at our own formation about money. And how do we approach it? What does it mean to us? How did we grow up? What are the values or the biases or the shames that we have about money? And where is that in our lives? It's a good tool. So you might want to run this in your stewardship committee or some version of it, and take a look at it. Because when we understand our relationship to money, we understand that our own household budgets and finances and our debt and our freedom from debt are mirrors into our own selves. They're mirrors into how we approach the world, and how we think about our own sustainable path. So when you look at your budget, what are you seeing? What are you seeing reflecting back? Are you seeing how you spend money and how you make choices about that? We have a whole webinar that we'll be running later this year on creating a culture of generosity that helps us take a look at our buying choices, our investing choices, our advocacy and social choices that we make. How does that relate to our understanding of generosity? So that's a great webinar to take a look at. How do we make our priorities? What are our positive and negative experiences? When we use a money autobiography as a tool, we can understand it because it's a common, I was about to say common currency without realizing I was making a pun. So it's a way that we can have some language about our experience of money and how it is a tool, how it's worked in our lives. So going through that with your committee can be really helpful. I recommend it. And then maybe sharing it out in a rector's forum or an adult ed program or something like that. Or you can just run this one single question. This comes right from the Spiritual Money Autobiography. It asks of us, how has your view of money changed throughout your life? What did you see when you were, living on your allowance from your parents? What was it like when you had that first job? What was it like when you were like me, getting yourself out of debt that you got into? What are your 40s and 50s like? What is your retirement like? How did you do that work in your own life? And how has your view of money changed as you've moved through the cycle of your life? It's a great question to run in a small group. And it's really beautiful conversations that come out of it. I want to give us another tool, and this is another thing that we could do a sermon on, a rector's forum on, an exploration of our own baptismal covenant and how we can use that covenant to apply some stewardship formation to it. As we move through, our teaching and those early examples of life and community that the apostles give us, we can do some studies of those parables about money or possessions. In the TENS resource library, we have a whole list of Bible passages that you can do small group Bible studies on that are related. There are about 25 of them throughout the Bible that you could use in a reflection or a Lectio Divina or centered prayer or something like that that you might want to talk about. So do a Bible study about money or possessions or attachments. When it comes to resisting evil and repenting, ask the question in community, how do our financial decisions reflect our values? What are our conflicts between what we know we should do and what we do? How do we relate those two things when it comes to our choices about money? You know, we all have those moments that we need to say, or we say, I really want to do this, but I might not, or what could I be doing instead? Those are a whole science of economics is built around how we make those choices. When it comes to proclaiming the good news, when we talk about our giving as a sign of our faith, it's an action and an action of our values. We invite others into this relationship. That's what proclamation of the good news is. It's invitation to learn about what matters most. People who make gifts to their own congregation are the best evangelists because they're literally giving of themselves, and they have a stake in the game. They're really passionate about what they do. So remember that. And as we move into our formation, remember that your own gifts are a reflection of that relationship that you have with generosity and abundance. When we come to seeking and serving Christ in all people, how does your church serve its neighbors? How do you seek and serve Christ in all people? How do your funds create programs that benefit your community externally and your community at home? And how do we talk about that? How do we talk to others about what our churches do and what they provide? A few years ago, Partners for Sacred Places, they are a consulting team that does fundraising, mostly capital campaign fundraising for churches, all denominations. They ran a study called the Economic Halo Effect. And they determined that every temple, mosque, and synagogue and church in America gives an average of $1.3 million worth of service to its community every year. That's an average number that takes into account mega churches with massive outreach and tiny churches where they are just sustaining and caring for the members and their immediate community. But on average, and that's by just being on your block, by giving community groups space to meet in. Sometimes my own church is located on a block with a lot of trees, and we have a light in front of our church. And the neighborhood really appreciates that we have this light because it adds something to the neighborhood and makes people feel safe at night when they walk. Oh, this light is in the front of the church. They feel safe walking by it. So the things that we don't even remember or acknowledge that our church gives by being in a place can contribute to the success and the good feelings of a community. And they try to quantify that, which I think is interesting, but keep that in mind. Just by being you, by serving your neighbors, by being there, you're contributing to society in a way that if you weren't there, that would be missing from the equation, missing from the economy. And that's a big thing to realize, I think, in our church. So we often forget that we have real value to people who we don't consider members, but our wider community. Finally, in the promise that we make about respecting the dignity of all people, remember that every single gift in a campaign matters. Every gift counts and every gift is valued. So from the 2 copper coins to the largest check to the biggest stock gift, and all the gifts in between that your congregation gets, every single gift matters, and we are grateful for it. And so it deserves recognition. It deserves acknowledgement. It deserves to be blessed when those gifts are made and shared with the community, because they matter. And I know that we probably all think about that. Oh yeah, I care about every gift. But sometimes, often, people who make small gifts feel sorry for those small gifts that they make. I wish I could give more. I hear this all the time. Here's my check. I wish I could give more of it. Or my pledge is only, it's going to be small this year. And what a place for them to feel that they have to come from. Remember, we are all generous in the ways that we can be. So thank you for your gift. Your gift is the best gift. And if it means something to you, it means something to us. So those are a few things that I have in terms of stewardship formation. I've got some book studies that I'll share with you in the materials, and some other things that you can run. And always, you can use the TENS seasonal reflections that are a part of our annual campaign series. You can download them now from our website and use the Lent reflection, get ready for the Easter reflection and the Pentecost reflection. They are throughout the church year. They're 300-word position pieces with reflection questions that follow them. You can insert them in the bulletins, or you can bring them to an adult ed or a rector's forum or a Wednesday night discussion group, or whatever you do. They're really simple little things to give conversation starters about stewardship. And of course, during the campaign, if you're using the TENS materials, during your campaign window, we have weekly reflections that we release that go from September through November each Sunday. And you can download those. They'll be ready in May for your download, but you can download those and use those as weekly discussion pieces. So a lot of congregations use those as a weekly part of their pledge campaign, and maybe do a little conversation series after church around those ideas of stewardship. So we give you at TENS a way to have that conversation from Advent through Pentecost, and then specifically at your campaign time through these reflections. Take a look at those. They're really good tools. Finally, I want to end by saying the other part of the role of a stewardship committee, running the campaign, helping the clergy and leadership make the right pastoral decisions, knowing how to talk about money and where it goes right and wrong, and leading formation. So those being the other things that a stewardship committee does. We should also participate in the setting of goals. I have a theological and professional opinion that the people who are charged with raising the money for our congregation should be an active part of setting the goal. I think nothing is as weird as saying to a group of people, this is your goal. It was formed by the finance committee, and it feels like this is the hole we have to plug, and so that's your number. And if your congregation does that, I understand why it happens. And I think it's really hard for a stewardship committee to say, okay, I own that, and I'm really working toward that, because they haven't participated in how that number got set. I think your stewardship committee, especially if they've worked for a few years on it, they have a real good sense of what the trends are in the congregation. And if you didn't see our January presentation on specifically on how to evaluate your pledge campaign and how to take a look at trends, you can download that from our webinar website. and take a look at it or ask questions about it. I think it's a really important tool. Your stewardship committee knows, okay, these people, we might expect more gifts that are higher next year because this is the way the trend has been moving. Or look at the people who are moving from income earning years into retirement assets. How is that going to change our giving? And how might we think about that when it comes to our next stewardship campaign? So your campaign members are probably really intelligent people to invite into the process of setting the goal for your next campaign. So do that. I think it's really important for all the reasons I've said. When our committees are a part of that, they can also work on the other goals that our vestries and our leadership have for the church. That's to say that if the stewardship committee says, here's what we think we can raise, I think the vestry can then say, we also need you to think through with us how we increase membership, how we recruit and train volunteers. You seem to be good at recruiting and training for things. How do we diversify our volunteer base? We need more ministry ideas. We want to convene a group. If the stewardship committee formed with this ministry of talking to people about the gifts that they share, is involved in the other goals of our church besides money, they can help when they have those conversations say, you know, I talked with Sue and she would really like to develop a youth sports program and she has expertise in it. And she's even willing to do it as a volunteer to get it started. I think we should talk with her about that. And that meets the goal that the parish had of setting up a new young adult or youth ministry. And we really need to do that. So how do we as stewardship members, deeply connected, well-respected, engaging people, how do we identify leaders for other areas of ministry? So when we're in communication with leadership, we can all be helping to grow the programs. That's a really inspirational view of stewardship because it takes it away just from money and talks about mission. Always, we should be doing that. When we set those goals, they should be things we can achieve. They should be things that impact us. They should aspire, but not be so crazy that we can't achieve them. You might say something like, we hope that 50% of our givers will increase next year. So this is better than saying, we need to raise our stewardship by 10%. Who said that and why? What's that based on? But if you say, I bet we could get half of our members to make a modest increase in their pledges, that's something we can work for, right? Saying 10%, well, one person could increase stewardship by 10% if they're the right person to ask. But you know, if we ask for people to make incremental change, those are sustainable over time. I love those big outlier gifts. Our churches need them, but we can't always rely on them. We need to rely on that middle group of folks who make those middle gifts. And if we can move them up incrementally, we have sustainability built into our stewardship campaign. A few more thoughts about goals. So as I said, not all of your goals need to be about finances. They can be about other things that have been on that to-do list for a while. We need a revamp for our newsletter. We need a new website. How can we talk to our members about who has the skills to do that? Or raising money for a specific, let's update our website and get it professionally done again. And every few years we need to do that because websites get out of date pretty quickly. So, or creating new materials. Who's in our church and really good at writing ad copy and can help us think through how we message our mission to our members? A couple of other things to put into our plans. I like this either as stewardship committee members or as clergy leaders. I like to check in with the lowest and highest givers. just to say hi. I'm not asking for your gift, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you. If I don't know them well, I'd like to know who they are. How did they come to be here? Why does this place matter to them? And why do I pick lowest and highest? I do it because I want to learn about that piece of the funding structure of our church. Those big outlier gifts, I'd love to learn, like, why are they inspired to make these huge gifts? And I don't have to say that's why I'm contacting you, or we can say, you're one of our most generous donors. I'd really like to talk with you about what your journey to that generosity has been like. What lessons could we learn? What could we teach others about that? Because often it's not just, I have a lot of money. It's also, I have some money to give and I really have a desire to give it. And here's been my journey to get to that place. So learn those stories, or learn the aspirations of people who make our most modest gifts. Where are those people coming from? How can we support them? How can they feel that their gift matters? And by some personal attention, they do feel then that their gift matters. You might invite your stewardship officer from the diocese, or your finance team from the diocese, or other outside organization to come in and talk with you. Maybe your deanery president or dean can talk about the things that are happening regionally in your church. Connect them with the superstructure that we are all a part of as a part of the Episcopal Church, and remind them that it's not just assessment or apportionment that the diocese takes, but it's mission and service that is provided. How can we plug in more? How can we learn more about that? And sometimes an outside voice giving a sermon or a presentation on our generosity can be really inspiring. Maybe you'll do a book study together. Maybe you'll start putting things in your newsletter every month about stories of generosity. This is another great thing for a year-round stewardship committee to do. Commit to writing an article for your newsletter every month on stories of generosity, interviews of abundance that you have, ideas that you have, reports on ministries that are happening in your community, those things that link our mission and our generosity together. And please work with your treasurer and your finance team. Your pledge statements should go out. I like them quarterly. That I realize in some congregations that's way too much work. They should at least go out once in a year, halfway through, to let people know where they're at. My own church this year sent them out in September, just as we were about to launch our stewardship campaign. I was like, come on, why are we like waiting all year? And this is how you find out how far behind you are, or if you're on track or whatever. And then we're asking you to pledge again. So get those out at some earlier point in the year. Let people know we're paying attention. Your gift matters to us. You're a part of the mission and ministry here. I realize that with volunteer treasurers or with diminished, maybe you used to have a full-time admin person and now they're part-time. Those are harder asks to make administratively, but do get them out mid-year at least, preferably a few times a year, and let people know where they're at with their giving. Want to end by inviting you all to our theme this year, Rooted in Abundance, which is really trying to remind us that the central act of our faith is about an invitation to an abundant garden, celebrating all that we've been given in creation and seeing how those gifts of creation pop up in our communities, how they spring forth, how they blossom and bloom, and how we tend and harvest those gifts. And it's reminded in the passage from Jeremiah, which also, by the way, is our password this year, Jeremiah 17:8. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought, it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. Would that we all were like trees planted by water. And this is our theme for the year. And we hope that you'll download our theme or use pieces of it throughout the year to create your stewardship program. All right, I've said a lot, and I'm going to pull us in for the last 15 minutes back into our group and ask you for any questions that you have about anything we've talked about or anything you might want to bounce off me. And we already have one from Kathleen. Please come off mute.
Thank you, Davey. I have two questions or comments. One of them being, in a lot of your presentation, it seemed like we have the knowledge of people's giving. The treasurer technically is the only one who has that knowledge. So how do we reach out and do the things that you've asked us to do without that knowledge or making them feel like we know how much they give?
Thanks for that question. That's a great one. And I would like to answer it. So not every community does that in the same way. Some communities, everyone knows what people give. Some communities, the stewardship committee knows. And in some communities, only the treasurer knows. It depends on the values of that community. I work with one congregation here in the Diocese of California, and the pledge secretary has been the pledge secretary for 45 years, bless her heart. And she keeps all that information locked in a file cabinet. She's the only one that knows. That's a model. So how do we do that? Well, I like a stewardship committee to have some information. I don't think they need to know the exact gift because I think it's helpful when they do, but if you're in a place where they don't have access to that, I think knowing a range is helpful. You know, we know that this household gives between 1,000 and 2,500. Maybe that's enough. And then we can start to put them in a place where we can say, what would it be like to move them? I'll send you as one of the documents, this steps model, right? You've probably seen that before in a template where you can look at gift range and number of households and impact on the budget. It's a little step-by-step thing that goes up a page, and it helps us understand how different households make those gifts. And if we know the range, without knowing the specifics, then we're not getting into that creepy place of, I know what you give, but I know in general where your household sits in the step. If you're totally not on board with that, then pulling back from that and having the conversation with your treasurer or with your clergy about who maybe is moving through their life in a way, who do you think might be able to increase their giving this year is a perfectly valid question to ask somebody who has analytics on years of trends, right? So you might be able to say, you know, where should we apply this question of who should give more, or can we move them through their journey and generosity in a particular way? So it's all sensitive and it's all different in every community. My own community, the stewardship committee knows what everybody gives. That's just how that works, and we know that, but we don't ask for a specific gift amount. I don't say, Davey, will you give $2,300 this year? I just say, will you renew or increase, or what can you do? But we know it so that we can understand where to work. That's how our community works. Different communities, different values.
Thank you. And my second question is specific funds compared to the general fund. When somebody gives for I'll give, but I want to make sure it all goes to this. Do you have any comments on that?
I have a lot of comments on that. Restricted giving when it comes to stewardship. No, I'm going to use the word toxic. I think it's toxic because it it says, I don't care about all the programs, I only care about this. And I don't think that's a message we want our members to be able to send. They can certainly say, I really care about the choir, and so I'm going to make a gift that supports all ministry, and I have a little extra, and I'd like to give a special designation to the ministry of the choir this year, or whatever it is, right? But when we only give to one thing, we're making a real statement about how much we care about the rest of the work of the church. And so I would go to that person and say, we really honor your gift. We really value your concern and care for this ministry. And we have many ministries to fund and form here. And those are important as well. Another way to address that is the narrative budget. So I'll send you a link to a TENS article and a whole template on how to create a narrative budget, which shows your ministries in different silos, and it divides out all of those fixed costs like salary and benefits, like utilities and space rental, like all those other things that go into running a church, and divides them into their prospective ministry areas. And that helps people say, if you want to fund worship, it's this much of the budget, and it takes the lights and the salaries and the building and maintenance and all that into consideration. So it's not just funding a program. We need all of your funding for all of it. So those are a few ideas on restricted gifts. We have a sample gift acceptance policy in our resource library. And it might sound ridiculous to have one, but your vestry should take a look at it at some point. And it helps you know what gifts you can say no to. Sometimes people make gifts that have so many strings that they're not good for the church. And you might want to know, this is a gift we would say, think about it in a different way, please. Or, whatever, because sometimes gifts don't have generosity behind them. They have other motives, and we should know about that. Great question. Hard question, though. All right, hit me with another one. Yes, Evan. Come on off mute. Evan, you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
Okay, does that work?
Yep.
Okay. If it's important for a church to kind of model abundant life generosity through the way it designs its own budget, I mean, I'm just thinking about a church that maybe never spends anything on outreach. It seems to me it's modeling a view of scarcity when what we want to be teaching is abundant life in Christ. Am I wrong, or?
Evan, I don't think you're wrong. I think it's about how do we message our mission. So some churches are just pulling in enough to pay their bills and keep the church open, and that's life sustaining for the church. So then we need to say, what are we doing with that? If it's going to salaries and building, what are we doing with the salaries and building that mean something to us? Is that pastoral care, how we love each other and take care of each other? Is that the book study that can happen? So you might not every church can have those big marquee ministries that say, I have a food program that feeds 1,500 people a day or whatever, right? And we can't all do that, right? So what can you do? And those are the things that you highlight. So success is scalable. And we can say, well, we might not have fed 1,000 people this year, but when the neighbor down the street, their house caught on fire, we were able to do some things for them. We were able to give them a trunk full of groceries and give them donations of clothes or whatever, right? So how does your church care for the world? And tell those stories. Because that's, if all your budget is sustaining is people and building, then you have to talk about what the people and building allow for mission to do. So it's how we tell those stories, Evan. And let's build up to a place where someday we can give more of our budget over to ministry. And I think this is my final thought on it. Even if you have $50 in your outreach budget in your church budget, even if that line item is tiny, put it in, because next year you can increase it, and the year after you can increase it, and it's there as budgets are visions of values, right? So budgets are reflections of what we care about. So put outreach, even if it's modest, into your budget and talk about it. And then next year, talk about it again. Can we add any to it? I know it seems small, but incrementally, it makes a world of difference. And it elevates that in the parish conversation about our finances. That was a great question, Evan. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Luis. Come off mute, please.
It's Lewis.
Lewis.
Hi, we have, I'm in Bakersfield and in San Joaquin, and we've got a wonderful parish. We run a stewardship campaign every year. It's good. But we find that when we need a special giving, like fencing or things like that, the money really pours in. And we don't know quite how to shift that dynamic to regular giving. And I don't know if you could say something about that.
I can say a little about it. We experience this a lot in capital campaigns, right? So I work with a church and they ran a capital campaign that gave 477% of their plate and pledge to their capital campaign. Now, what does this say when a church can give 5 times to a campaign what it gives in its annual giving? It says to me that we might not be making our best gifts to stewardship. And it says that when something really matters, people are willing to be extra generous. And so there are 2 lessons there. One is, let's ramp up our stewardship formation so that people have the opportunity to make their best gift in stewardship. I think the second is we have to find the way, and this is where we need to massage the language of mission and help people understand how every dollar raised goes to something that matters and goes to mission. We have to make that connection for them so that they feel as excited about the fence as they do about funding the rest of the things that the church does. That said, special projects also live in a special area. Sometimes we need them to come out strong and say, we got to get this fence built or the roof fixed, or don't get me started on how much parking lots cost to be repaved. But those things that have to happen in church are really important to us, and they're necessary. And so sometimes we need big gifts to get that work done, but we need to find, Lewis, as you point out, the way to create that enthusiasm back into annual giving. I think the tie-in is mission. Make it as exciting that people really want to rally around what your church does and how you can talk about it. Cynthia.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Cynthia puts into the chat, and I can tell Cynthia, like I, works for a diocese. Remember that when your church participates in diocesan ministry, that diocesan ministry is spread across a whole region and is increasing that outreach and output throughout our neighbors. So sometimes your gift to the diocese and the time that you spend going to committee meetings and convention and your annual gift to the diocese is then something that we can also say, I put that right into outreach when I create a narrative budget. I say our assessment is a part of our outreach. It's a part of our community outreach and our work to the greater world. It's not just some money that disappears into a void. That might also be because I'm a diocesan staff member. I understand how that works, but we need to reforecast, to refocus how our diocese participates with us in the greater ministry and herald it. Dioceses are great. They do great work. I love the question that Hunter is saying about percentages and proportional giving. And I want to say a little bit about that. I recently spent some time with the now retired Bishop of Olympia, Greg Rickel, who said, forget this whole thing about the tithe, folks. Christians give 100%. We are all in for Jesus. We are all in for the mission of the church. We roll up our sleeves, we show up, we raise our families with values, we take work that is meaningful to us, that contributes to the world. We show up on Sundays, we show up on Saturdays, we do the work, and we still find money and time and wisdom and all those things to share. We are all in to our church. And so, yeah, it's rare to find someone who could go from 0 to 100, but we can get people to increase incrementally when they think about how they have time to give. My own church has just had a big group of people move from raising families to people with college grads. And now they're all saying, I can't wait, where's the outreach? I want to do more. I have time on my hands and money that I'm not spending on tuition. Where can I roll up my sleeves? This is a great thing to have in a congregation, and to know that they've now made a decision. I can give more and in a different way because my kids are done with school right now. And so I have time to give. Find the way that we can be all in. Hunter, you've got something to say.
This is disconnected from what you were just talking about, because what I find to be the challenge in our parish is creating a stewardship committee that is sustainable. It feels like we're starting over from 0 every single year, versus like a vestry that has, you know, a normal rotation of people each year. And I just wonder if there's any secret to like developing this as and helping people see it as their ministry in the church. I think that's what we're missing, is that people understand it as a task-oriented thing and not a way to participate in the life of the Spirit.
Hunter, I think you're absolutely right. And that's why this presentation spends so much time on how do you form that group throughout the year to be a community, so that when the campaign ends and you thank them and you celebrate, they're also participating already in next year's campaign, starting to think about. So in January's webinar about evaluating, I ask our stewardship committees to say, take a moment to say what went well. What would you do differently? How do you want next year's campaign to run? And begin processing and starting planning right then. So, and assume that some people will rotate off, other people will need to be recruited, and you'll have a core group that stay formed. And that group, that middle group from year to year, which will grow and expand and contract, but there will be some people who always are on that stewardship committee, or who commit to a few years on the stewardship committee. And so they can be a part of that thing where we don't have to grind the wheel back up again every year, but we have some continuity, and they can be a part of that formation. I find that the more work you do on creating that community to feel like a community and not a task force, as you point out, then that group wants to stay together. They start having potlucks and they start communicating with each other, and they form kind of a bond. We want that in a stewardship committee, because then they will keep doing the work and add more people to it. And it won't have to be, let's start from scratch and recruit a whole new team. That's exhausting work. Starting from scratch every year is exhausting. Great question. I also want to address Stephen's point in the chat, and I realize we're just about out of time, but Stephen says, we want joyful giving, but don't we also talk about sacrificial giving? And that's a word, sacrificial giving. You know, in the we don't say give till it hurts in the church. What we do say is remind ourselves, I think, that sacrificial giving means setting aside. It's that the root of sacrifice is to make something sacred, right? And so when we make our gift to the church, we take what is ours and we set it aside. First fruits, we sometimes call that, or other kinds of things. It isn't taking away from us. We're not sacrificing. We are making sacred. And I think that maybe that's just my theology. That's where I live in that world. But I really think that that's an important distinction. We don't want people to feel that we're making them open their veins. We want people to feel that we're inviting them into a process that invites them deeper into formation and generosity and abundance. So take what you have and find the way to dedicate it. This is why we don't just collect pledge forms, but we go through an act where we hold them up and we praise them and we bless them and we offer them to God and we say thank you, because those are our gifts. Those are our fruits that we offer to God. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that question. Friends, I know we are out of time, and I wish we had more of it, because this is a great conversation. And I want to thank you for participating on your Saturday with this. I will send out this video and the slide deck and a whole bunch of materials that I've talked about in today's message. And let's get together again. Come to another webinar. Our next one is going to be on intergenerational giving. How do we motivate those Gen Z and millennial donors? How do we adapt our giving programs to appeal to them and to accept the gifts that they have to give us? So that's on Saturday, April Fool's Day, the 1st. Come and join us, and we'll have another great conversation about stewardship, abundance, and generosity. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Have a good day. Enjoy your Saturday.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. We're in Tupelo, Mississippi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely wonderful. And we'll see you on the next one.
You bet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Brian Ridgway, if you want to stay on, I see you're still on. You asked me a question directly, and I'm happy to answer it for you in a couple minutes.
Okay.
Jane. So you talk about that you can only raise about 50% of your operations budget. Do you want to say a little bit more and see how?
Well, we have an elderly population. I'm considered kind of a youthful member of our church.
Good for you.
And I'm 77. But we're very blessed with a church that's 90 years old that has had major gifts given to it. So we have a good endowment. And the DIT, in our case, Boston, we are on Cape Cod, and we've gone through 2.5 years of pandemic, which we lost 20 to 25 pledges and members to aging out. So I was on last year's stewardship, which started late, and even though we came up 5% above what the previous year was, we lost 25 pledges. So it's if we didn't have the DIT and the money that's there, we wouldn't be able to balance the budget. And I guess one of the concerns that I have, one of the things that keeps resonating, you said, so I'm the chair of the building and ground. So I run of the $600,000 budget, I run $90,000 of costs to maintain the place. That's not the rector, it's just HVAC systems and all that stuff. I'm on the FinCom because most of the stuff that we do in building and grounds has a financial impact